Today we will be unboxing an iPad 5th generation that supposedly has never been updated and is running its original software version iOS 10. So without further ado, let's get this out of the box. And here is the iPad 5th gen. Looks like we have the space gray color, and it appears to be in pretty good condition. So let's see if this gets any life. And okay, looks like it's powering on. While we let that happen, let's see if we can take a look at any of the accessories here. Nothing really interesting other than a couple manuals and the Apple stickers, which is actually pretty nice. I didn't get any cables or anything, which is whatever. And okay, we boot immediately into iOS 10.
And we immediately can tell this is iOS 10 just because it has the older style battery icon. And looks like we have version 10.3.2 and a 128 gig model.
Now let's talk a bit about the specs and history of the iPad 5th generation. It was released all the way back on March the 24th of 2017, and this was a pretty interesting iPad release, mainly due to the fact the last time they released a base model iPad was like way back in 2012, and that of course was the iPad 4th generation. And the difference between this and like the iPad 4th generation is this time they positioned this thing as the budget model, releasing it at a starting price of $329. It also came in colors of silver, gold, and of course space gray, which is the one that this is. It also had storage options of 32 and 128 gigs, which makes this one even cooler because we have the maxed out available option in terms of storage on this thing. It also had the A9 chipset with 2 gigs of RAM, which is a slight improvement over the iPad Air 2, which you can see in the back right here. And by the way, this was pretty much the budget 9.7-inch iPad you could get before the iPad 5th generation, so that's why we're doing a comparison to this, by the way. But this was only a slight improvement over this iPad Air 2, mainly due to the fact this thing had the A8X chipset, and you're comparing that to the A9 chipset. And in terms of performance, you would not really see many differences. And of course, if we're going to compare this to the iPad 4th generation, this was a massive jump from this iPad to the iPad 5th gen, mainly due to the fact that this thing still has 32-bit architecture on its board, which is kind of crazy because you're going from the A6 chipset to the A9 chipset. And the cool thing about this and the iPad 5th gen, if we're going to do like a little comparison, is the iPad 4th gen was still getting updates around that time, which is kind of crazy to be honest. And by the way, I'm talking about the time of this thing being out. This iPad 5th generation also weirdly did not get the anti-reflective coating and laminated displays of other iPads, and this ended up just being like reserved to the iPad Airs and iPad Pros, which doesn't really make any sense because I know you're trying to cut costs, but it won't cost more to fuse the display and give it a anti-reflective coating, and they've been doing this to this day, by the way, on the base model iPads. And a bit of you will not even really understand what any of that means, so let me break it down for you. A laminated display is when the actual LCD, aka what is the actual screen, and the digitizer, which is what does the touch, are fused together, and it just gives you a much more like unified look on the screen where it doesn't feel like there's a gap. So like for example, if we tap this, sounds a little bit hollow. Well, if we tap this iPad Air 2, doesn't sound hollow. And you can also see the content is like right there and it is a lot better looking. And the anti-reflective coating is basically what it says. It's a coating that lowers the amount of reflection you get on your screen, and it is quite reflective here. You can see my light in the back over here on this thing. Although this wasn't all bad news on that front, like with the screen, it also was like technically more brighter in terms of the LCD. It was about 25% brighter compared to the iPad Air 2. But other than that, the LCD itself was pretty much the same resolution as the iPad Air 2. This thing also got the first generation Touch ID sensor, which the second gen that was released around this time was reserved to the 2017 iPad Pros. And in terms of the housing, it pretty much had the same exact thickness as the iPad Air first generation from 2013, mainly due to the fact that on the iPad Air 2, it was super easy to bend your device, like really easy. And to be honest, that is still kind of a problem with modern iPads if we want to get into that. But they went with the same dimensions as that iPad Air on this iPad 5th gen, just so it was a little bit more durable, but they still had things absent like the mute switch on the side next to these volume buttons. So like here's an iPad Air 1, and you can see what I mean right there. And it also got a slightly different speaker grill design, as the iPad Air 2 would pretty much have the same thing here, but like here's an iPad Air 1, and you can see the speakers look kind of different. And speaking of speakers, it also had 2 stereo speakers on the side, which you can see here, and it was like the iPad Air 1 and iPad Air 2 on that front, and I mean quad speakers would end up just being reserved for the iPad Pros. So for example, this is an iPad Pro. You can see the 2 speakers on top and the 2 towards the bottom. And that was pretty much just a iPad Pro feature at the time. The cameras on this thing were also not very good. It had a front 8 megapixel camera, which was capable of taking your standard 1080p 30 video and just 1080p pictures, while the selfie camera was even worse, as it could only do 1.2 megapixels on the selfie camera, which is really bad, and that can only do about 720p, for example. And another fun fact about this thing, this iPad also initially, like, weirdly was just called iPad in marketing, but like everywhere else it was called the 2017 iPad or iPad 5th generation. The battery on this thing was also pretty decent. It had about 8,000-ish milliamp hours, which allowed this thing to get the standard 10 hours of battery life you would see on these. And the cool thing about this iPad 5th generation is that it's still running iOS 10, and that is very cool because this thing only got a couple versions of iOS 10 officially on here, 10.3, 10.3.1, 10.3.2, which this thing is on 10.3.2, and 10.3.3. And overall, on iOS 10, it runs amazing. So you can kind of see how quick it opens and closes apps. And something really weird about this thing in terms of iOS versions and software versions, like what they were upgradable to. This thing was upgradable all the way up until iOS 16, where of course it runs really bad. But the weirdest thing about this is this thing, of course, only has a base A9 chip. iOS 15 would definitely suit this better just because it would match every other base A9 chip device, because every other base A9 chip device would just get iOS 15, and I mean, it wouldn't run great, but it would definitely run a lot better than iOS 16. This thing also lacked Apple Pencil support for some reason. People would be forced to upgrade to the 6th gen, which would come out like a year later if they wanted that, but still kind of weird they didn't give it on this thing. And now let's get into iOS 10. iOS 10 was the last iOS version to have the earlier version of flat design with boxy elements all over the UI, like the dock, and the icons still had the more classic flat look, which is still kind of mimicking their skeuomorphic predecessors while of course still being kind of flat. On iOS 11, this was completely thrown out the window in favor of a much more rounded off and much more minimal design. And this is overall such a weird looking iOS version because you can tell they kind of wanted to go for some sort of redesign, but they ended up not. And they just kind of like mixed like some iOS 11 elements with iOS 10 elements, but overall it still has the earlier flat design look. But other than that, it also has some really weird design decisions, especially on like the lock screen, as right here you can see the clock is aligned to the left on this thing, and this is only on iPads that could run iOS 10, which is super weird, and it is just super odd looking, especially when you know this was only there for a year. Slide to unlock was also thrown out the window on this iOS version, meaning to unlock your device you would just press the home button. And this was mainly due to the implementation of widgets, which you can see right here, and if you would slide to unlock normally, you would go in this direction. So when you do that, it now just brings up a widget menu, as you can see. The notification center was also really weird looking and nothing like what you've seen before on any other iOS version. And so you can see you would have the one tab with your widgets, and it looks completely different to any other widgets you would see on a previous notification center. Normally it would look like this, and then you would have your notifications, and it would also have a really weird looking thing for notifications. It would have bubbles. Well, here, this is where bubbles were implemented in your notifications actually, so let me send a notification just so you can see what it would look like. So as you can see, it has that like bubble look that is much more modern and in line with what you see on modern iOS versions. Well, on iOS 8 and 9, it would also look much different in terms of notifications. You want to have the bubbles. And also, this is kind of a minor thing, but a also big thing at the same time. You might notice that my screen is kind of yellow. Well, this is because of something called night shift. And this is basically where your device automatically adapts to make your screen warmer when it becomes like nighttime and later times of the day, whenever you want it to be customized to be like. So I have it on currently, and as you can see, if I turn it off, it becomes much more brighter and less warm. And if I turn it on, my screen becomes yellow. So yeah, this wasn't on iOS 9 before, and because this is basically making people less incentivized to jailbreak, because on previous iOS versions, if you wanted that functionality, you would need a jailbreak tweak to get that. So yeah. And know how I mentioned the iPad 4th generation was still supported on iOS 10? Well, this also ties in with application support on iOS 10, as this was the very last iOS version to feature support for 32-bit applications that you could get off the App Store. As, I mean, this was the last iOS version that supported 32-bit devices in general. like that iPad 4. So on iOS 11, there was like no reason for them to support it anymore, so of course it was dropped there. Apple Music also had a much different look on iOS 10 compared to previous iOS versions, because to be honest, this looks a ton like iOS 11. Down to the bolder fonts and how the icons and everything look. It's just a lot more in line with iOS 11, but it was overall redesigned here, and I honestly don't think it looks as good as something like iOS 9. So let me show you iOS 9. And so here's iOS 9. It has much more thinner fonts, and it overall just feels like it fits on iOS 9 and even on iOS 10. So I don't really know why they redesigned Apple Music this early on, to be completely honest. They should have waited for iOS 11. And on later versions of iOS 10, which we are on 10.3x, instead of that classic videos app you would have on like earlier versions of iOS 10 and even iOS 9, you would get the TV application, and it's basically the video app, but you can directly get videos and TV shows from this app instead of having to like sync with iTunes. And they've overall, like around this time period, we're just trying to completely eliminate any reason for you to use iTunes at this point. Siri was also apparently completely revamped to be much more smarter. You can also now make it use your messaging apps and could do stuff like send messages and other stuff like that. It could also search your photo app for specific photos. So let's try this right now. Siri, bring me to my very first photo. That really didn't work. It just brought me to my wallpapers. It could also book ride services like an Uber. It could use your payment apps to make payment, and it could use your fitness apps to like start and stop workouts. The Home app was also added, where you could control accessories that were supported around your house with just a tap. And then you could also send notifications for updates on your accessories and share access with these accessories to the rest of your family. QuickType also got some updates, like predicting what emojis you could use in a conversation or writing, and predictions for stuff like words were overall supposed to be significantly more accurate with the new tech. But yeah, that is a look at this iPad 5th generation running iOS 10. I'm very happy to get my hands on one of these. I've wanted one of these for a little bit now, and they are very cool. I overall like the design of it, because I mean, my old iPad was an iPad 6th gen, and I overall really like that design with the home button and everything, and I'm just glad to have one of these just because I really like iOS 10 especially. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please consider dropping a like, subscribing with notifications on, hyping the video, and sharing this to someone that would find the video interesting. Also, please consider checking out my social media accounts, which you'll have in the description and the end card. I have a Shorts YouTube channel where I post my short form content. I have a TikTok, I have a Twitter, and I have a Reddit. But yeah, this has been Derek from Certified Legacy, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
What we do here is go back.